Hey everyone, welcome back to Trust Test Hub. Buckle up, because I'm about to take you through something absolutely wild. This is the story of how my marriage of 8 years came crashing down, and how I turned the tables on my wife's plan to humiliate me in front of everyone she knew. Let's dive in. It all started Thursday evening. I was coming back from the garage when I heard my wife, Genesis, laughing in the living room. Not her normal laugh, this was the kind of laugh that stopped me dead in the hallway. She had 3 of her friends over, Hannah, Arlene, and Daphne. I could hear Hannah asking about a photographer they'd hired. Yeah, a photographer, for a divorce announcement party. Let me back up, because this is going to sound insane, and you need to understand how we got here. Genesis and I have been married for 8 years. We met in college when I was working on a startup with 2 buddies from my computer science program. She was in business management, and we connected at some entrepreneurship mixer. I was full of energy, big plans, and she seemed genuinely excited about what I was building. We got married 6 months after graduation because we were young, stupid, and thought love was enough. Here's where it gets complicated. My startup didn't just fail, it spectacularly failed. We'd gotten some angel investor interest, and I'd convinced Genesis to move across the country to be closer to funding sources. Then the whole thing collapsed when our lead investor pulled out, and my partners bailed for corporate jobs. I was 24, married less than a year, stuck in an expensive city with no job, and a wife who'd relocated her entire life for my dream. Genesis got a job in sales at a tech company within 2 weeks. She was good, really good. Within 3 years, she was making 6 figures with bonuses, climbing fast. Meanwhile, I was bouncing between contract work and trying to get another venture off the ground. Every attempt fizzled, market shifts, obsolete tech, competitors beating us to launch. I wasn't sitting around playing video games like Genesis would later imply to her friends. I was working my tail off. But working hard and making money are 2 different things. Genesis was paying for everything. Rent, groceries, her car, my car, insurance, everything. I contributed maybe 20% of our expenses on a good year from freelance gigs, and I could feel her resentment growing. It started with small comments about how tired she was from carrying us financially. Then it became jokes at dinner parties about supporting a dependent. Then it stopped being jokes. She'd come home from work and look at me with this expression, half disgust, half contempt, like I was something stuck to her shoe. I'm not going to lie and say I was a perfect husband. I was depressed, frustrated, angry at myself for failing over and over, but I was still trying, applying for jobs, pitching ideas, doing freelance work. It just wasn't enough for her. Nothing was enough once she'd decided I was a failure. About a year ago, I landed a stable remote job with decent pay. Not amazing, but solid. I started contributing more to our expenses. Genesis barely acknowledged it. By then, she'd checked out of our marriage. She'd stay late at work constantly, go on weekend trips with her girlfriends, spend hours texting and laughing at things she'd never share with me. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know what. So, Thursday evening, I'm standing in the hallway, listening to Genesis plan her exit strategy with her friends. Hannah was asking about the photographer again, and Genesis explained she wanted professional photos of the moment she told me she was leaving, not just for herself, but to share. She wanted my reaction documented. Arlene asked about the plan, and Genesis laid it out. She was throwing a celebration with friends, but it was really her freedom party, her liberation from 8 years of being tied to a worthless husband who couldn't provide. She'd rented an event space for Saturday evening, invited about 30 people, friends, colleagues, some family, everyone except me. The plan was to get me there under false pretenses, saying it was a surprise party for her work promotion. I'd show up at 7 hours, everyone would yell, "Surprise!" And then Genesis would announce she was leaving me, free from carrying dead weight for a decade. Daphne asked if she was worried I'd make a scene. Genesis laughed. She said I was too pathetic to do anything but cry or beg. She hoped I'd beg because that would make the photos even better. She wanted to remember the moment she took her life back from the loser she'd married. Hannah brought up Judah, asked if he'd be there. Genesis got excited talking about him. Apparently, she'd been seeing this executive at another tech company for 4 months. He had a penthouse downtown, drove an expensive car, all the things I wasn't and didn't have. Judah would be at the party, staying low-key until after her announcement, then come over, put his arm around her, showing everyone she was moving up in life. They talked logistics. The photographer positioned to catch my face. Arlene filming on her phone as backup, a custom freedom cake, Genesis's expensive new dress to look stunning while destroying me in front of 36 people. I stood there, absorbing every word. Here's the thing nobody knew. I wasn't shocked. I'd been watching Genesis pull away for over a year. Late nights, secret texting, looking at me like garbage. More importantly, I'd been preparing for something like this. The house we lived in wasn't a rental. It's a 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, left to me by my grandmother 5 years ago. Genesis moved in, but it's in my name only. Inherited property I never added her to. She assumed we owned it together, made comments about our house and our equity, but legally, she has zero claim. I checked with a lawyer 2 years ago when things got bad. He confirmed that in our state, inherited property stays separate unless I explicitly add her to the deed, which I never did. I'd been sitting on this, not because I'm an evil genius, but because I wanted to be certain before using it. Hearing her plan my public humiliation with her affair partner gave me that certainty. I walked into the living room. All 4 of them stopped talking, looking guilty. I smiled, asked if they needed drinks or snacks. Genesis recovered fast, said they were fine. I nodded, went upstairs, and started making calls. First, my lawyer to prepare eviction paperwork for Genesis to be served Sunday morning. He'd drawn it up months ago. I just gave the go-ahead. Then, a property management company to change the lock Sunday at 9 a.m. Then my bank, removing Genesis as an authorized user on my accounts. She had her own accounts for her salary, but she'd been on mine for household expenses. I took her off immediately. I canceled our shared phone plan, opened a new one for myself, and transferred my number. Her phone would stop working by Saturday evening. I logged into our streaming accounts and removed her access. Petty? Maybe, but I wasn't leaving her anything connecting her to me. Friday, Genesis was bouncing around the house, excited, making calls about the party. She asked what I was doing Saturday evening. I said, nothing special. She got this pleased look, said, perfect, because she had a surprise to celebrate together, and I needed to be at this address at 7 sharp. I said, sure, I'll be there. Saturday, Genesis spent the day getting ready. Hair appointment, nails, shopping bags with her new dress. She did her makeup for over an hour, put on jewelry, the works. She looked incredible, like she was preparing for the event of her life, which, I guess, she was. She left at 5 to set up, reminding me to be there at 7. I watched her drive away in her car, the one I'd been making payments on for 3 years. Another thing she assumed was hers, but legally wasn't. I got dressed. Jeans, button-down, nothing fancy. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I pulled into the venue's parking lot at exactly 7 p.m. Through the windows, I saw it was packed. Balloons, decorations, the freedom cake on a table. The photographer was ready. Arlene had her phone up. Hannah and Daphne looked excited and nervous. Genesis, in her stunning dress, stood in the center, triumphant. I walked in. Everyone yelled, "Surprise!" just like she'd planned. Genesis walked over, trying not to smile too big, savoring the moment. She called for attention, saying she had a big announcement about her future, her happiness, putting herself first. The room got quiet. The photographer raised his camera. Arlene started recording. Genesis looked at me and said, "Surprise." She wasn't celebrating with me, she was celebrating her freedom from me. She was leaving, done being married to someone who couldn't support himself, done carrying the financial burden, done pretending she was happy. She was moving on with someone who had something to offer. People gasped. Some looked uncomfortable, most shocked. This wasn't what they'd expected from the invitation. Genesis watched me, waiting for me to break down, beg, give her the satisfaction of seeing me destroyed. I just smiled. And that's when her expression started to change. She looked confused, like she couldn't process why I wasn't falling apart. She recovered fast, saying it was typical I couldn't take this seriously, that I was in shock or denial. I told her I wasn't in shock. I'd heard her planning this on Thursday with her friends. Every detail. The photographer, the cake, her speech, her boyfriend Judah lurking in the crowd, waiting to claim his prize. The room went silent. Genesis's face turned angry. She accused me of eavesdropping on a private conversation, violating her privacy. I said it was hard not to overhear her cackling in our living room. But sure, let's talk about violations. Hannah stepped in, saying I needed to calm down, that Genesis had every right to leave a marriage that wasn't working. and I was being manipulative. I wasn't trying to make anyone feel anything. I was done pretending. Genesis rallied, telling everyone she was leaving me, that she'd been seeing someone else because she deserved a man who could provide. She'd spent 8 years supporting a husband who couldn't hold a job, chasing failed dreams while she carried us financially. She wasn't completely wrong. I had failed at multiple ventures. I had been financially dependent on her for most of our marriage. But here's what she left out. I told everyone she'd been living in my house, inherited from my grandmother 5 years ago, rent-free. Every dollar she spent on expenses, she'd have spent on rent elsewhere, except she got a 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. The house was solely in my name, inherited property I never added her to. Legally, she had no claim. I checked with a lawyer. Our state's laws were clear. Inherited property stays separate unless explicitly transferred. Genesis went pale. She called it ridiculous, said it was our house, that she'd paid utilities, groceries, everything. She had rights. I explained she didn't. I'd confirmed it legally. She'd been a guest, my wife, living in my house. The photographer stopped shooting. Arlene lowered her phone. The crowd watched, not the entertainment Genesis promised. Daphne tried defending her, saying it didn't matter whose name was on the deed. They'd built a life together. I agreed she'd bought groceries, paid the electric bill. She could take anything she'd purchased. But the house and my pre-marriage belongings stayed. Genesis started panicking, asking where she was supposed to go. I said she might want to check with Judah about his penthouse, since she was moving up in life. That's when Judah revealed himself, standing at the back, looking uncomfortable. He put his arm around Genesis, but it looked forced, not triumphant. He called me unreasonable, vindictive. I asked how long he'd been sleeping with my wife. He said it wasn't relevant. I said it was, since I'd been paying for her phone, her car, the roof over her head while she planned her exit with him. Genesis said I was cruel, that she'd stayed with me out of pity. Tried to help me succeed, but I kept failing. She'd had to accept I'd never be the man she needed and deserved happiness elsewhere. I said she deserved that happiness starting now. Her eviction notice would be served tomorrow at 9 a.m. with 30 days to vacate. She said I couldn't do that. I said I could, and I was. She started yelling, calling me vindictive, petty, cruel, saying this was why she'd fallen out of love with me. I stayed calm. It felt good to stop pretending, to stop walking on eggshells around her resentment. Hannah offered Genesis a place to stay. I said that was great. She'd need it since I'd removed her from my bank accounts and her phone would stop working in an hour. Genesis checked her phone. Her banking app wouldn't load. Her calls wouldn't go through. She looked at me with disbelief and rage, saying I was trapping her with no resources. I pointed out she had her own accounts with her 6-figure salary. She wasn't trapped, just cut off from mine. Judah said he'd take care of her, that she didn't need me. I told him to take her to his penthouse tonight since she'd be evicted in 30 days. Genesis cried, not sad tears, angry ones, saying I'd planned this to humiliate her. I said she'd hired a photographer to capture my humiliation, so yeah, I turned her plan around. The party died. People left awkwardly. The freedom cake sat untouched. Genesis, Judah, Hannah, Arlene, and Daphne walked out. I stayed to confirm Genesis had paid for the venue. So cleanup wasn't my problem. Sunday morning? The process server delivered the eviction notice at 9 a.m. I was out grabbing breakfast. But when I returned, Genesis had called Hannah to pick her up. Hannah called me, demanding to know why I was kicking Genesis out of her home, treating her like a criminal for being honest about her feelings. I explained it wasn't her home, it was mine. She wasn't my wife anymore, so she needed to leave. Hannah called me vindictive, saying this was why Genesis wanted out. I asked if she knew about Genesis's affair with Judah. She said it wasn't an affair because our marriage was emotionally over for years. I hung up. Monday, Genesis's lawyer, Rivers, called. He wanted to discuss equitably dividing the marital home. I told him there was no marital home to divide. It was my inherited property. He said Genesis had claims from her contributions, utilities, maintenance, improvements. I asked if he'd seen the deed. He admitted it was in my name, but argued her contributions gave her rights. I said my lawyer confirmed otherwise, and she could waste her money in court if she wanted. Rivers got aggressive, calling me spiteful, saying my behavior at the party and eviction showed a pattern of control and abuse. I laughed. The woman who planned to humiliate me publicly was calling me abusive for not letting her live in my house for free. Genesis called from Hannah's phone, furious. She said she couldn't believe I'd force her into court. She'd spent 5 years making that house a home. I reminded her she'd hired a photographer to capture my pain, planned a party to destroy me, and had an affair for 4 months while using my resources. She said the affair didn't count. Our marriage was dead for a year. I asked why she didn't leave then. She said she was figuring out logistics, trying to be compassionate because I'd be devastated. I pointed out hiring a photographer wasn't compassionate. She said that was about reclaiming her power after years of being dragged down by me. Tuesday, Genesis showed up, pounding on the door. She'd needed to pack, but I'd changed the locks. I told her she could come Saturday with supervision. She said she didn't need supervision in her own home. I said it wasn't hers, and I didn't trust her not to damage anything or take what wasn't hers. Wednesday, her mom called, saying she was sad about the marriage ending but thought I was handling it poorly. I explained the party, the photographer, the affair. Her mom said that didn't sound like Genesis, but even if true, it didn't justify kicking her out. I said contributing to expenses wasn't ownership. She called me cold, unrecognizable. Thursday, Genesis returned with Judah. He wanted to talk man-to-man about her mental health, asking me to reconsider the eviction. I asked how long he'd been sleeping with my wife. He said it wasn't relevant, Genesis was miserable, and he'd given her understanding. I said he should let her move into his penthouse. He admitted he lived with a roommate and couldn't take her in. I laughed. Genesis had bragged about his penthouse, but it came with a roommate and no room for her. Genesis said this wasn't about Judah, it was about me being cruel. She'd made a mistake with the breakup, but I was destroying her life. I said I wasn't, she just didn't get to live in my house anymore. Judah admitted his finances were tight. Student loans, credit card debt. Genesis looked at him, realizing her penthouse prince wasn't what she thought. Friday, I ran into Daphne at the grocery store. She said Genesis was falling apart on Hannah's couch, having lost her home, husband, and stability. I said Genesis hadn't lost what she owned, just access to my things. Daphne said I was punishing Genesis for being honest. I asked how she'd feel if her husband hired a photographer to capture her pain when he left her. She had no answer. Saturday, Genesis arrived with a moving truck and her friends to pack. I supervised as she took clothes, shoes, jewelry, and tried claiming electronics I'd bought. We fought over every item, coffee maker, air fryer, blender. I let her take kitchen stuff she'd purchased. It took 6 hours. The house looked empty but lighter, like I could breathe again. Genesis asked if I was happy, if this was what I wanted. I said I'd wanted a wife who didn't resent me, but since I couldn't have that, I was fine with her leaving. She said she'd fight me in court. Her lawyer thought she had a case. I said she could try, but the house was mine. A week later, Rivers filed to stop the eviction, arguing Genesis had tenant rights from 5 years of residency. My lawyer countered she wasn't a tenant. She was a spouse in my inherited property with no claim. In court, Genesis painted herself as the wronged wife, investing in our home only to be discarded. Rivers claimed her contributions, new water heater, landscaping, paint, created rights. My lawyer said those were normal expenses and she'd lived rent-free in a house worth $25,000 a year in rent. The judge asked if Genesis was on the deed or had any written agreement. Rivers admitted no, arguing marital property laws applied. The judge said this was an eviction case, not divorce, and the law was clear. The house was mine. Genesis cried, saying it was her home. The judge sympathized, but upheld the eviction. Genesis confronted me after court, saying I was using legal technicalities to destroy her life. I said I was using the law and ownership, that she'd planned to humiliate me. She claimed the party was about her freedom, not hurting me, that I'd twisted her venting to friends. I asked what context made hiring a photographer to capture my pain okay. She said she'd been emotional, didn't mean it. I said she meant every word when she thought I wasn't listening. The next week, Genesis scrambled for a place to live. Hannah's couch wasn't a long-term solution, and Genesis couldn't afford much. She'd blown savings on the party, clothes, photographer. She called asking to pay rent for a few months. I said no. The house wasn't for rent, especially not to her. She asked about the car, which we both owned. I said she could keep it if she refinanced it in her name. She said she didn't have time with everything else. I said she'd better make time. I wasn't paying anymore. Judah showed up alone, saying Genesis was struggling and I was inflexible. I asked why he wasn't helping with his supposed executive money. He admitted his finances weren't solid, loans, debt, no room for Genesis. I said she'd jumped from one unstable situation to another, except I gave her a free house. He said they had a real connection. I said they could connect in whatever apartment she found, not my house. Genesis's mom tried appealing to my decency, saying Genesis was falling apart. I said I wasn't retaliating. I was just not housing someone who didn't want to be my wife. Genesis tried a new angle, suggesting marriage counseling, saying the affair with Judah was over, that she'd been wrong about everything. I asked if she really thought counseling was an option after her party and 4-month affair. I said the only path forward was her packing and leaving in 48 hours. Her friends kept pushing. Hannah called me cruel. Arlene left voicemails. Daphne showed up at my workplace, saying Genesis was nearly homeless. I said Genesis had a 6-figure job, family, friends. She'd figure it out. Daphne said I needed to let go of the party. I said Genesis apologized for getting caught, not planning it. The final eviction day came. Genesis showed up with a moving truck, Hannah and Arlene. They loaded her last belongings, clothes, books, personal items. She kept looking at me, expecting me to stop it. I didn't. At 4:45 p.m., she asked if this was really what I wanted. I told her to leave her key on the counter. She said she couldn't believe I'd become this person. I said I couldn't believe she'd planned to photograph my pain, but here we were. She left the key and drove away. The house was bare, but mine again. My lawyer confirmed the eviction was complete. Genesis sent one final message saying I'd destroyed everything we'd built, that she'd never forgive me. I didn't respond. We hadn't built anything together. I'd inherited a house, and she'd lived in it while resenting me. The divorce is moving forward. Her lawyer's trying to claim something, but mine's confident. I'll keep what's mine, my house, my accounts, my dignity. That's the story, folks. Genesis wanted freedom, and she got it, just not the way she planned. Thanks for tuning in to Trust Test Hub. If you've got thoughts, drop them below, and I'll see you in the next one.